Well, everybody, what's the crack? And welcome back to episode number 36. That's 36 of the Inline G Flute podcast with me, your host, fucking Inline G. I'm so organized, I had to Google my own podcast to find out what number of episodes this will be. I've got like 3 episodes in the bank. Who am I, Joe Rogan? Man. So, following on from last week's belter with the most Irish Englishman in the world, Philippe Barnes, I'm delighted to get another of my own personal favourite flute players on the podcast this week. You've heard me say in this podcast many times, there are 3 Baroque/period flute players in the world that I sort of put above the rest. They're my favourite, I adore them. That is Rachel Brown, Bartol Kuyken, and the man himself here today. Although pigeonholing them as a period flute player was my own first mistake. As genuinely, there's probably not a flute on this earth this man has not played. So this week's guest is conductor of Les Ambassadeurs La Grande Écurie, curator of Les Concerts de Pan on YouTube series, multi-flute soloist, chamber musician, recording artist of genuinely countless albums, Alexis Kossenko. Now, if you want to skip to that interview, go ahead. Just let me get the usual housekeeping out of the way so I don't have to disrupt your lovely listening experience throughout. So skip ahead a minute or so to get to the interview, but before then, here we go. The Inline G podcast is free and will always be free. However, if you wish to donate to the podcast, you can now do so through the Patreon. On the screen now is the address, and for the audio listeners, it is patreon.com/the Inline G Flute Podcast. It costs €5 or dollars or pounds per month, and with that, you're keeping this podcast alive. I do everything around here on my own, including marketing, graphic design, research, scripts, audio editing, video editing, production, etc. Becoming a patron helps generate a regular income for this podcast, meaning I can turn down other work to focus purely on it, hocus pocus, and also to travel to meet the best flute players in the world and ask them who their favourite Spice Girl is. As a thank you, you'll get to put your questions directly to my guests, and you'll get all the episodes a wee bit earlier than everyone else. So if you can afford it, sign up over there. It means a huge amount. It is incredibly appreciated. But if you cannot afford it, don't worry. It's grand. You can listen for free. So without further ado, here is this week's Inline G Flute podcast with the one, the only, le seul, Alexis Kossenko. It's quite cool for me to get you on. I'm very excited.
Thank you.
And then usually the first thing I ask any guest is, do they play Inline G or Offset G? Because the podcast is called Inline G. But I feel like asking you this question is going to be quite different because you play like every single flute in the world. Do you have any kind of opinion on Inline G, Offset G?
Well, yes and no, because since I play very often on both systems, because I don't play only on one flute.
Yeah.
So my modern flute is inline,
Okay.
and I got used to play like that. But I might and any kind of historical flute which is not a bump system is inline. In fact, by definition.
Yeah.
So I'm used to it. But I do happen to play sometimes on historical flutes like can be Louis Lot and others, or some other types of flutes. And in that case, I might have flutes with offline G, and sometimes with the inline G, it does happen that I feel on some fingerings that I have to be more careful to be really precise.
Really? Okay.
Yes.
See, that's interesting because like I studied in France and nearly every French player plays Inline G. But I never really knew why. I assumed it was just tradition. And a lot of people, it's not. I rarely saw Offset G in France. I don't know if there's some kind of connection.
I'm sure I did have on some of my earlier flutes. So I really got used to both.
Okay, yeah. Very good answer. Very political answer. Okay, so yeah, obviously within the period instrument world, like especially the period flute world, you're a bit of a household name. Like I always say, like I'm not super educated on it. I love period instruments, but I don't know as much as everybody. But there's 3 players in the world that I really love on Baroque and classical flutes. It's yourself, Bartol Kuyken, and Rachel Brown. They're like my 3. And I talk about them all the time.
But I feel very honored. Thank you.
You're very welcome, man. I have to get the other 2 in the podcast. They're next. They're going to be, big fan of them all. But I found, I didn't know this until I started doing some research. You studied at the CNSM as a modern flute player.
Yes, actually, modern flute is my main instrument.
Really?
I actually started on a true modern flute, and not even with a curved head, when I was at the age of 5.
Okay.
And that has been my on my real instrument, my instrument, my
Okay.
mother tongue, since the age of 5. And I entered the conservatory in Paris within the class of Alain Marion
Yeah.
with that instrument. But it is true that at the same time I discovered the world of early music really young, because
Okay.
well, although my parents were not musicians, they were music lovers, and my father knew of recordings of Bartok Kuyken and others, and Franz Breugen, and without any kind of specialty, but he happened sometimes to like some of those recordings, and this sound became familiar to me. And also I was um, uh, I had a very early a passion for music of even earlier times, like Monteverdi or even
Oh,
Renaissance
really?
piano.
Okay. Wow.
So the sound of all these weird instruments was very intriguing, and I became really interested. And that's why at the age of I think 13, my first step into the world of early music was to borrow a recorder,
Okay.
and even a plastic recorder, just to have some different sensations and
Okay.
learn new fingerings. And that's important for you to know that I didn't play recorder before I played the modern flute, like
Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes people do, because it's
Yeah.
more accessible, and it used in the past to be taught at school as well.
Yeah.
No, a recorder is my second instrument. And shortly after that,
Ah.
I was lent my first Baroque flute, so I might have been 15 years old in this moment. And then I learned the Baroque flute, and later the different forms in between the Baroque and the modern.
Okay.
When I was entering the conservatory in Paris, I was basically starting also the Baroque flute at the same time, but it was like a side
Okay. Right. But when you say you picked up the recorder at like 14, do you mean like the little plastic recorders, like the ones kids get in school? Like the little.
Well, the very first one, yes, because
Yeah.
it's what we had
Oh,
somewhere
wow.
at home.
Okay.
But it was just during a few months, and then
Even still, that's,
soon,
yeah.
soon I bought at least a more decent, if not yet really good, but wooden recorder.
Ah. It's so funny you started with one of those. I didn't think. I always assumed them as like children playing them and then you move on from it. I didn't think someone would come back to it. That's really cool. What was it like studying with Alain Marion?
Uh, well, when I think about it, I still have, I get very emotional, because Alain Marion, I met him when I was really young, because I was still a student in Nice, but he had connections in Nice because he was doing a master class in the
Yeah.
summer. And I took part as being a student in the conservatory in Nice, and then I got a little support from the conservatory to pay this summer class, and that's how I met Alain Marion. And I was, I think, 12 when I met him for the first time,
Uh-huh.
and I did 3 times in a row. And he was somebody very spontaneous and very generous. He's from the
Yeah.
south, like me, south of
Yeah.
France, and he had this very sudden enthusiasm for students that he liked, and he wanted me to apply to the conservatory in Paris as soon as I was ready, without waiting to be a little bit older, because when I entered the conservatory in Paris I was 14, which is quite frequent for violin or piano,
Yeah.
but rather rare for flute, where
Yeah.
most of the students start a little bit earlier. I
Mhm.
didn't go quicker, but I started really early.
Yeah, that's incredible. And what was it like studying with him at the Paris Conservatoire?
Um, well, he's somebody
So
who was
interesting.
really like father or grandfather like for his
Okay.
students. Very, very generous, very, as I said, spontaneous. Um, talking loud with a lot of enthusiasm, and not somebody who was before all analytic, but
Hmm.
also working a lot with instinct.
Yeah.
And well, he didn't have really a plan for students. What you have to to study first, and
Yeah.
then you do etudes, and then you will practice this piece, and then
Mm.
later when you're ready on it, we could more or less choose as we
Yeah.
wanted the repertoire that we bring.
Yeah.
Um, and I remember several moments which were for me very, very interesting, and that I never forgot. Like, sometimes when there was a little trick when there was not enough time to practice a new piece.
Mm-hmm.
I discovered there was a trick to not to be not to get him angry, but it was to bring duets. And
Bring what?
I would start the lesson by saying, "Well,
Oh,
I didn't
duets.
have so much time to practice a new piece, but I have duets here." And he was
Yeah.
always like so happy, like grabbing his flute and saying, "What did you bring? What did you bring?" And we played a lot of duets together. And I think that
Oh,
part of the best thing which happened with him playing, because then there was this immediate, and very spontaneous way of playing, listening to each other. And I remember this moment that, contrary to all chamber music teachers who would tell you, you have to look at each other, and sometimes the students would, religiously write on their score,
yeah.
look at each other and things like for beginning. He said, no, you don't need to look at each other. You just need to feel each other and look.
Yeah.
And we would turn the back to each other and start
I've done
uh,
that. That's so cool.
just closing eyes by feeling, maybe hearing the breathing and
Yeah.
things like that. And for me, it became really an essential part of my musical life, to understand that there is something else that can happen than just looking, which is almost like a miracle, or using all our antennas
Yeah.
to feel each other and to understand, to predict what's going to happen.
I love that.
And that was really fantastic.
That's exactly what I had in my head of what I imagined Alain Marion was like. It's so French as well to me. I love that. But you said he's from the south of France as well. Is that typical of southern people from the south of France? Are they a little bit more red-blooded, a little bit more intrinsic, a little bit more? I've been to Marseille a few times and I find that, but
Yeah, it's very possible that it is a bit more typical. I don't want to draw a general
yeah.
rule, but I mean, southern French or Italians, I mean, we speak with the hands much more,
Yeah.
and there's
Love it.
another
Yeah.
approach that more Cartesian, and now um, I mean, as a grown up, I need both of it. I'm really
Okay.
made of more you understand
Analytical
what I mean?
kind of, yeah.
But that was very important. I don't want ever to lose that. I
Yeah.
can tell you one or two other anecdotes about Alain
Oh, please
Marion.
do. Please do. We could do
Um,
this the whole episode. I'd be delighted.
yes. When well, it happened one or two times that I brought some music. I remember Bartok, Suite Paysanne Hongroise, and that he liked it so much that from this moment, whenever somebody was bringing this piece and that I was around, because we had common classes most of the
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
then he would say, Alexis is going to teach. That was for me very shocking the first time, because I was very intimidated. And sometimes he also said, Alexis, I played this piece 2 weeks ago in concert, and well, I hope you won't be angry, but I stole some of your ideas. And
No,
the,
you
the,
wouldn't be angry
the
at
fact for
all.
me is, it doesn't mean at all that I had genius ideas, but it's to show how humble,
Yeah.
how honest he could be, because he always said, and this is, I know it's how much it is true now, because I feel exactly the same, that we certainly had a lot to learn from him, but he was also himself learning from every of
Yeah.
his students anytime, learning from teaching, but also learning because it's not because you're young and you have less experience that you might not come with suddenly
Yeah.
some really interesting ideas that makes you reconsider some of the things.
Yeah, and it also builds up that relationship with the teacher as well, doesn't it? It's like a sharing of ideas. You're an artist in the sense. Can I ask you just one quick question on this, because I'm just curious on my own. When you were studying
Of
at the
course.
conservatoire, did you vous à la Marion? Did you have to use vous with the teachers, or did you tu in French?
No, I had a vous always, because I don't know, I was really young,
Mhm.
and maybe with him it was more natural. Now, to be honest, I feel much more comfortable when somebody tells me to, even if
Okay. Okay.
maybe I don't want to see the age difference, or
Yeah, that's the other thing. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
refuse
Makes
to
you feel
go
old.
to get older. I don't know,
Yeah.
but also in the early music fields, we often are a little bit more equal. There is no kind of myth of the maestro,
Yeah.
and for me it became really natural to say tu, which doesn't mean it is less respect, not at
No, not
all.
at all. Yeah, it's a different
Um,
vibe. Yeah.
yeah.
I'm just curious about that because yeah, when I studied in Paris, I studied with Catherine Contant, and I still, when I see Catherine now, I haven't studied with her for years. I still use vous. I don't know, it just feels like a mark of respect to call her vous. But I also studied with Magali, and we always tued. We never vooed. So it's always, I'm always curious, like I don't think there's a rule, it's just a feeling, but I'm curious about how it works. The other thing I have to ask you about quickly, because I talk about it so much on this podcast, and when I've got you on, this is my chance to really get to know it. We talk a lot in the English speaking world of this great like French flute school, like the Grande École Française de la Flûte. What is it to you? Do you think it's a style of playing? Is it pedagogy? Is it something between the two? What is this thing for you as a French flute player?
Well, it's not something so easy to answer, but when all the time that I was part of the class and I was studying with my teachers and studying with Alain Marion and Raymond Guillot, who was his assistant, and well, I was not really conscious about that because it was so much of my familiar surrounding that it was for me normal to play like that, and I did not really analyze it.
Okay.
But after Alain Marion passed away, some years later, when I listened to his recordings again, then I was quite amazed to finally analyze and see some things in his flute playing, which I find quite typically French.
Okay.
And it has to do with a research, a constant research of colors.
Okay.
And for example, rather than a constant, powerful, thick, rich, maybe with a lot of timbre, sound and a constant vibrato, it's a little bit caricatural what I say, because I don't want to mean that other nations would have such a stubborn way of playing. But rather than that, it was playing with the delicacy of the vibrato, which could be intense in one place, but completely without vibrato in some other ways, finding a delicate stream of air in which you do hear the wind, and not be ashamed about that in some moments, because this way you make the first, not only you have a more, I would say, éthéré, I don't know how to say, with like gas,
ethereal, je crois.
Exactly. And that melts into the silence or into the color of the piano, and things like that. And well, it's actually very naturally mixed very, very well with my own research, also with the different sounds that I could get from different types of historical flutes. Therefore, I was not prisoner of a kind of vibrato word on one hand and non-vibrato word on the other hand. There was all these shades, all these nuances in between, which very naturally led me to create connections without feeling that I was betraying one thing or another.
Oh, it's exactly why I wanted you on this podcast, man. You know everything. This is great. This is such good information. Also, vibrato versus non-vibrato, then I have to ask you about it. Is that as important a thing for you? Because we hear this so much with period orchestras of like, you can't play with vibrato, or you can, and there's conductors that use it. Is it a big thing for you, or is it then finding that grey area where there's times to use it and times not to?
Well, I could make a caricatural statement and say I hate vibrato. But it's
I love vibrato.
It's not so true, actually. What I hate is when the vibrato takes over the expression. And a little bit, like if I would also make a caricature with a violin or cello players, that they think that because they move their hands, they're playing expressive. And it's the same thing with flute players. The vibrato is just a way to color the sound, but there are many other ways. And it's true that with the Baroque flute, I do not, or with different historical flutes, we do not use vibrato to the same extent that we do now. The bass is a sound without vibrato, but the vibrato is used punctually in different means, which can be with a with a throat, with a chest, with moving the flute, which we don't really apply nowadays, but it's also often described, or of course with a finger vibrato, which is called flattement. And this even in the 19th century, when we imagine what is called romantic music, singers, violinists.
Yeah.
I mean, you have your picture about romantic music. I mean, when Fürstenau shows 10 pages of different types of vibrato, and at the end he gives examples where to play vibrato, like a prominent note, and he said that this ornament should be used like singers and violinists do. That
Okay.
is never more than 3 or 4 times in a piece.
Yeah. Oh,
And
I
then you say,
love that.
what? Wow. But when it comes rarely, then it's like really tasty. It's
It
something,
is, yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
And you really have some really conscious effect. It's really nice. Now, I want to come back to something.
Go.
Often I have I had a lot of experiences of teaching on Baroque music to modern flutists because
Oh, okay.
being invited, so-called. I mean, I have this kind of Baroque specialist um, on my
Yeah,
forehead.
I did the same thing. Sorry.
Yeah, which I would like to be more subtle, but it doesn't matter. So
Okay.
I'm invited to talk about a Telemann Fantasia or Bar Sonata,
Mhm.
and a big quantity of the students will come and play with a really sound without vibrato, which I find dead. And the problem is that when if modern flutists listen to a Baroque flute recording, there are many aspects in the Baroque playing which are interesting to take into account, but for them, the most noticeable is the absence of the vibrato. So
Yeah.
the first thing that too often students would do would be to remove the vibrato. That
Yeah.
like the first guarantee that this is a bit more authentic playing.
Authentic. Yeah.
And most of the time, by removing the vibrato, they remove every mean of expression.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit what we call to fill the baby with a bath,
With the
the
bathwater.
water of the
Yeah.
bath.
Yeah. No.
So in that case, I have to tell them, no, please. We will talk later about the appropriate vibrato or not, but for now, put it back because we have to
Okay.
talk about music. And most of the time, they're surprised that I come and I talk about music, about phrases, about expression, much more than about what they expect to be historical rules, what is forbidden, what is allowed. Because for me, Baroque music is first of all a matter of deep and intense expression. And then we see that the vibrato is just one of the means of expression. We can remove what is too much, but I have to talk about everything else. So as you see, the vibrato is often considered like the symbol of the difference between Baroque
Yeah.
and modern playing, and I think this should be taken more carefully into consideration.
See, I love that. Yeah. And also, as you're playing, when I listen to you as a player, I know that academia and academic research is very important in the Baroque and period instrument world. I'm not saying with your playing, it sounds much more intrinsic than a lot of other players. It sounds a lot more natural to me. Do you think it is? How important is academia to you when you're doing a performance on period instruments?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understood right your question. How important is the vibrato, or
No, how important is academic research in general to period instrument? Do you think it's something that should be really delved into, or can we just get on with the music? What do you think?
Okay, now you're touching one of my favorite subjects.
Oh, good. Right.
To me, reading, being informed, is something absolutely essential.
Okay.
But it cannot be the how to say finalité. I don't know how you say it in English.
Finality, yeah.
The finality of the playing.
Okay.
We must learn the grammar.
Mm-hmm.
But the restitution should not be a grammar lesson. Nobody cares about it. If somebody is making a speech, is really eloquent, he's not thinking of the grammar. He has previously assimilated the grammar and he's a master of it, but then he's free from it. And that's very important. So I have two sides of me. The one who is a scholar and the one who is a spontaneous, instinctive player. And when the scholar is satisfied, but my instinct tells me something contrary, then I have a problem. Okay. When I play according to my instinct, but the scholar in myself is unsatisfied because I know I'm violating too many or not taking what I know of the rules into account, I also have a problem. But when both of my personalities agree, then I think I'm on the right way.
Okay, but then how would you? What would your advice be for a student going into that kind of world? Then how to marry those two things together?
Well, you have to be really curious and read testimonies, read treatises with a certain form of distance anyway, because a treatise is like a grammar book.
Yeah.
It's not. It's interesting, but at the same time, it's not so interesting to read. It doesn't give the finality of the music. But the well, be curious. But what is the most important about learning the style of a period is to know a lot of other music and possibly of other pieces of art of the same period. Then
Ooh.
gives you context. Literature, architecture, painting. For me,
So you think
painting is
this is important? Yeah.
yes, because I'll give you an example. Many years ago, when I was about 20, I was touring with a Baroque orchestra. One of my first experiences with Baroque orchestra, by the way, and we were playing Vivaldi concerti. And we arrived in Roma, and we had a little walk in Roma. And for the first time in my life, I saw the Trevi fountain. And I was amazed by it. But I mean, I had to stop because what I saw, it was something which was made of stone, but which looked much more alive than the music we were playing, corresponding maybe of the same time or some similar inspiration, and the music we played sounded to me more stiff. And I thought, how is that possible? That music, which is something which exists only when you make it, sounds less lively than this sculpture of stone, which was, by the way, is extremely interesting because it looks symmetrical, but if you look left and right, it's completely different elements.
Oh,
It's
really?
different
Okay.
scenes, but from distance they look symmetrical.
Ah,
And then I have
okay.
a kind of revelation about all the the perfect rules of symmetry, of perspectives, and all these things, and which certainly rule also a piece of music in this time, but also how much it looks like it is full of movement, of life, and also what should be the aim of the musicians when we're creating that. We know, of course, that a lot of elements are not written on the scores in this time. They are, because they are implicit most of the time. It can be ornaments, but it's also a lot
Dynamics
of
as
dynamics.
well.
The dynamics, they are there, but they are according to the rhetorical context, to the harmonic context, and some of them can be more or less free as well. And the dynamic marks that you have on a Baroque score are usually just kind of echo things. But there's a lot more than that. And by the way, if Quantz gives an example of a piece where he writes all the nuances, all the dynamic marks, which are implied only by the harmony. It goes from pianissimo to fortissimo. That's very interesting. Okay.
By the harmony in context, sorry, is it like implied by the harmony within the context, i.e. certain chord progressions or actual harmonic notes? Like can you explain that a little bit?
Well, if you have, for example, if you have a dissonant chord, it means that this is forte.
Something.
Or
Okay.
fortissimo.
Okay.
If on a consonant or on a resolution of after you have the dissonance on the resolution, then it's piano. He also shows on progressions. I mean, this is anybody who has the Quantz treatise can look at this carefully, and it's because, well, sometimes we don't pay too much attention to it because the piece is not among the most interesting, but it's very interesting to see the range of dynamic which you don't expect from Baroque music. To be there, to be hiding in a score which doesn't carry any dynamic mark.
See, I love that. Sorry, what were you going to say there? I interrupted you. You were going to say something else.
Yes. So what I mean is that, I'm somebody who is also very much instinctive, but I'm for example, let's take an example now in much later music. I recorded also CDs of later music like Undine Sonata, Reinecke, and Andersen. And despite I decided to play also on period instruments, my
Oh, very good.
I wouldn't want that anybody hears when I do it that I apply some rules. It has to feel
Well,
it has to feel fluent, inspired, and highly expressive.
mm-hmm.
So I don't know if I'm violating many rules, but I also know the context of the time. I did read some
Yeah.
treatises, and that leads me to a certain way to play and apply vibrato, to apply rubato, and well, I would not claim that I'm right and that I'm entirely right.
Yeah.
I
Yeah. Yeah.
certainly, I mean, there are many other things to take in consideration. But also, I'm inspired by what the little I know about the literature of the time, and about a global context, which at least makes
Yeah.
me project in my mind some pictures, and then I want to go with all my imagination into these
Yeah.
fairy tales,
Where
and
are
this
we? Sorry, in
ballad.
literature at this kind of time. So obviously we're talking like late 1800s or 1800s kind of time. So romantic era literature. Are we talking like Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, the big Russian guys? Is that the kind of is it the same era, isn't
Yes,
it?
for example, and just by reading the novel, which is the Undine novel, which is at the origin of the,
Of course, yeah.
and then from there and I'm not a very good specialist of that time, but at least I felt very much inspired by
Educate
the little
something.
that I knew,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I relate also to all the other music that I know from that time and from the generation before that has also where you find the roots
Yeah. Yeah.
of
Yeah.
it. The same when I recorded the Soir Païen, which is music from the impressionistic time, so French
Sois
music
païen.
with a yes, I made a CD with melodies for voice, flute, and piano, which
Okay.
include Roussel, Tapley,
Okay.
Ibert, and so on.
I love that
And
period of French music. I love it.
yes, and this music with voice is also amazing, especially because
Yeah, I've
for
done
me the
something by
special pleasure of
there's something by
uniting the
Capley.
voice and the flute.
What's the Capley? What is it? La Flûte Invisible, or is that?
There are two pieces, La Flûte Invisible, and there is also
I've played that once. It was great.
Écoute mon cœur, which is
Yes, I've done
a
Écoute mon
piece for
cœur.
flute and voice without piano.
Yeah, without piano. Yeah, I've done that one as well. Yeah, beautiful music, and yeah, I've done those kind of things. Sorry, what were you saying? Um, why I interrupted you there? Why did I interrupt you? What were you saying?
That's about all. I mean, I had another idea in mind, but it
No,
dropped
don't
out.
worry.
But maybe I can come back to it later.
No, actually, just one thing I wanted to say as well, just because you were talking about the Trevi Fountain in Rome. I went once to the Trevi Fountain in Rome, but I was 14, I think, at the time. Italy had just won the World Cup. So I think it was 2006. Italy had just won the World Cup, and we were going to Rome, and we were going to the Trevi Fountain, but I was looking everywhere for an Italy football jersey with Cannavaro on the back. And just as we were coming up to the Trevi Fountain, there was a guy selling Cannavaro jerseys. So I went and bought a jersey and left and never saw the Trevi Fountain. So I still haven't seen it, but I do still have the jersey. And yeah, swings and roundabouts.
I was talking about paintings, and every
Oh yeah.
time I'm very much into painting, and which is a passion which started with collating paintings representing musical scenes and instruments, because
Yeah.
I had some interest for also to learn from it about how the instruments were used, what type of instruments, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And now this interest became a wider interest into the art of painting. I mean, from the Renaissance till maybe beginning of 20th century, then I'm a bit less passionate, but it might come.
Yeah.
And and every time I see something from a painting, whatever it is, it can be a portrait, can be a domestic scene, it can be a landscape or whatever. I mean, I also have immediately connections that go in my mind with music that I know and that I
Okay.
immediately associate to the time. So that's one of the ways.
I get
And
that directly with impressionist paintings. Like when you see an impressionist painting, it's very easy to connect it to like Debussy, Ravel, that kind of era. I don't have the connection as much with Baroque yet because I don't understand Baroque painting as much, but certainly in impressionist stuff, it's so clear.
it
That
is.
music.
And when I was talking about what I know of, we were talking about the French style of playing. And when I told you that I was very impressed with recordings I heard about Alain Marion, when I finally understood what was the essence of his playing, and probably of my playing without knowing, because
Yeah, because you do
it was
inherit it,
a
yeah.
mixture of my own personality, but
Yeah.
also being in this context. And I'm not somebody who imitates, but even
But
without
you
wanting to
inherit.
imitate,
Yeah.
I'm inspired. And then I immediately now I understand. I mean, when you look at the paintings from this time, French paintings from this time, you also have a clear relation
Yeah.
with the French schools, and having these things which are sometimes a real based on impressions rather than concrete.
Yeah. Yeah. The idea of something as opposed to the actual presentation of it itself. I love that. Yeah. Okay. Just quickly, you're the guy to ask for this. My knowledge of Baroque flute and classical flute, and even going up to Romantic and Louis Lot, etc., generally falls into two categories. I have everything past Boehm and everything pre-Boehm. And then I started to research more and I realized, okay, there's a lot. Just for the listeners, can you do a really quick breakdown of how the flutes went from, say, Baroque flute up until modern? Like the differences we've seen in the different types of flutes.
Now,
okay, the floor is yours. Let's go. A running history of flutes. I can't wait.
good. So the story might begin rather in the Renaissance time, because I think it's quite important to understand
the
about
origin, yeah.
the Renaissance transverse flute, which you had recorders and transverse flutes, which were kind of cousins, which were used often by in families. And the Renaissance flute is a very simple instrument, because you might see here.
Yeah.
It's just a cylindrical piece of wood with
6
one
holes.
very little
It's
embouchure
tiny.
hole. It's very tiny. And 6 holes and 0
all the same
teeth.
size as well. The holes are all the same size, are they?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes. And the instrument is totally cylindrical.
Okay. So
and allows you to play with a really big range.
Okay.
And the flutes were played because they were playing with a very big range. There was no need, even when you played in families, there was no need to have for each part a flute of a different size, unlike other instruments, other woodwind instruments. Although we have smaller instruments, and we also have bass flutes in that time, which are a fifth lower, which allow to play songs and dances in consort in families.
Yeah.
The fact is, the instrument is not entirely chromatic, because to play it starts from the low D. D was always the bottom note, and to play the D sharp, I will not make sounds today. If you allow me, I'll just talk. But to play the D sharp, you have to play with a half hole open, which makes the note virtually
impossible to tune.
It's existing more in your head than in sound.
Yeah.
And the instrument is not considered totally chromatic. Despite this, the Renaissance flute was very, very popular and very widely used in Europe, as the iconography shows. Then came a time that when the music started to be more demanding, that this instrument was not meeting the fulfilling the needs. Also because of the lack of chromatism. And then it came a little bit out of fashion in the beginning of the 17th century. Then it slowly went out of fashion and was still known, but not really widely played. And we have only a few works of music which are still written for this instrument. But it's in France that there will be a very big step into the reappearance of the transverse flute, because in the second third of the 17th century, maybe between 1650 and 1675, then some French players and makers of woodwind instruments, they often were players who would play the oboe and the recorder and the bagpipes, and they often play more than one instrument. And there were two big families, the Hauteterre and the Philidor, who had a big dynasties, and they all made instruments as well as they played them. And they redesigned many of the woodwind instruments. They changed the bore of the oboes, the bassoons, the recorders, and also the transverse flute. And they also lowered the pitch, which was previously high, for kind of open air, loud instruments, to bring it more to the chamber sound and more civilized. And they also reworked on the transverse flute and they made fundamental changes. So here is the example of the first generation of Baroque flute, which, as you see, is made in 3 pieces.
Okay, so a foot joint as well. Is that additional to
Namely
what was
the head,
before?
the body, and the foot joint.
So the foot joint is extra to what was before? It's longer then?
The flute is a bit longer because it's a lower pitch.
Okay.
But
sorry, can I ask
still,
how much lower is the pitch? Is it? I think I read it's like a semitone, isn't it? Between.
So on such a flute, it's an entire tone lower.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah, this. If you have perfect pitch, that's a D.
Okay.
And it sounds like a modern C. So that was really normal in that time. I mean, you must know that the pitch has been something has been changing over the years, but often a different pitch was used in the same place according to if it was church music or at the chamber of the king or at the opera or for the concerts. Different types of pitch were used.
Yeah.
And I will show you actually how they could adapt to that later. So this instrument made in 3 pieces is the first step of big change, which made what we call now the Baroque flute, but which they just call the transverse flute in the time. And now the bore is not cylindrical anymore, but conical.
Yeah.
And it's a very big change. Why? That's one of the questions. And we think it's because with a conical bore, you can play the octaves until higher by just overblowing and not having to change the fingerings, unlike the Renaissance flute.
Yeah.
And on such an instrument, still you have the embouchure hole here, still small and round, and 6 playing holes, but also there is one key which allows to make the semitone between D and to have the D sharp between D and E. And now the flute is entirely chromatical. So in France, this instrument will appear at the end of the 17th century and will be ironically named German flute, flute allemande.
Okay.
Because in the previous generations, the transverse flute was often associated to the Garde Suisse, the Swiss guards, which were of German language. And this instrument is typically French, but it's called flute allemande.
Okay, I didn't know that. There you go.
And from France, it will migrate to other countries. Mm-hmm. It's French players who bring it to other countries. For example, Buffardin, who one very brilliant player who will establish in Germany. Hauteterre, who is known as Le Romain, his nickname. Yeah. We know now for sure because we did this recent discovery that he was indeed working in Roma, and you know it's not a coincidence that the transverse flute appears first in Roma before it grows and goes all over Italy.
Yeah.
In the next generation, the flute will be made a bit differently and cut into 4 pieces.
Ah, wow, I've never seen that.
And not 3 anymore.
Ah.
So that's around 1720, which means that when Bach and Telemann and the Germans, they discover the transverse flute, first they know about the 3 parts flute, but soon German makers and French makers will also divide the flute in 4 pieces. Why? One of the reasons is that it fits better in the pocket in the smaller case, but also that you can make, because I told you about the difference of pitch there were between different places, you can make several left hand joints.
Ah, so you can change the pitch.
Which have a different length and adapt.
Ah, okay.
Adapt to different pitch.
I've never seen a 4-piece flute. I didn't know they existed. There you go.
Well, I think that most of the Baroque flutes that people play are 4 pieces.
Oh, really? I thought there were 3.
Yeah, that's the standard Baroque flute. So this model will develop and will become widely used everywhere in Germany, in England, in Italy, I mean, everywhere in Europe. And most of the repertoire written for the Baroque flute is for this type of instrument.
Okay.
So throughout the 18th century, the difference will be quite smaller, rather things with a bore to allow more higher notes.
Yeah.
And in the last third of the 18th century, some small keys will be added.
Yes. Okay.
Here is an English flute by Potter.
Yep.
And already in the 60s, small keys are added to have. Why? Because the harmonically, the Baroque flute is based on D major. So if you close everything, you have D major.
You have
And
a
if
D,
you
yeah.
open the fingers in the order, you get a D major
Yeah.
scale.
Yeah.
That's very easy, actually. Playing in D major, you can learn in a few.
Yeah, the Irish
few
flute is the
hours.
same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But everything that goes away from D major and all the notes which are not in the D major scales have to be produced by what we call fork fingering,
Yeah.
which is to open a hole in between two closed holes.
Yeah.
And this is cheating with a harmony, the harmonics of the instrument.
Yeah.
That's why those notes are weaker and more delicate to be played in tune, because sometimes they're too high or too low, depends which ones.
Yeah.
And you
So
have to adapt with the embouchure
Yeah.
and to play them softer, because they can't be played as round as the other notes.
Yes.
And this is why some makers will invent these little keys, because the idea was to give to every semitone its proper hole.
Oh, okay.
Not what is in the D major scale.
Yeah.
So you have a hole which is for the G sharp, one for the B flat, and one for the F natural.
F sharp, yeah.
And the fact is, these holes being in a place where they can't be reached with the fingers, or not easily, so they decided to have an action with a small key. And this is an extension. The flute is still in D, but goes down to the low C. With the extension of this C foot joint.
Okay.
So this type of instrument will then develop and reach also the rest of Europe, despite until quite late, many of the good players, especially in France, decided to stick to the one key flute. And this flute you see is identical to what De Vienne might have used for his concertos.
Okay. Oh wow. Okay.
And maybe most of Mozart's quartets and concertos also were certainly played with a one-keyed flute. You know, in D major, G major, that's quite easy with one key. Despite, in this time, the flutes with more keys was already spreading and was known in Europe. Here is a later example from the 1830s. That's a German flute with, I think it has 9 or 10 keys. It goes down to the low B.
Yeah.
Which is not at all a modern invention, because just think that the Schubert variations need a low B. So
true, of course.
From the start of the 19th century, flutes, especially in Vienna, were designed going lower than C, but even to B, sometimes to B flat, sometimes to A, sometimes even to low G. We have flutes going to the low G. I think the idea was to compete with the range of the violin.
Okay. A low G? That's insane.
Yes, it's rare, but there are some flutes like that. They're either very long or then they are curved on the what is supposed to be the joint, and with a lot of extra keys, and probably it did not work very well.
Yeah, well, there would have been a lot of keys to get down to like low G and low A. Like there would have been like 4 or 5 keys then for the little finger.
Yes, and I will show you one a little bit later.
Okay, good.
So this flute made by Schmidt around 1830 is typical of what late Beethoven 9th
So Beethoven, Schubert,
or Schubert, or might have were played with these type of instruments.
Okay.
So then we have of course this is the basis of the so-called simple flute or simple system flute.
Okay.
And then comes the figure of Theobald Böhm.
Yeah.
And Theobald Böhm was himself trained of this type of flute. And most of the pieces that he wrote, including the Grande Polonaise, which by the way is in D major, and however virtuoso it is, most of his works were written for this type of flute.
I thought the Grande Polonaise was written specifically for the new Boehm flute.
No, not yet. He had not really designed his new instrument by then. And Böhm made himself simple system flutes of very high quality, by the way. And he made all his career as a virtuoso before he invented his new flute. And then
Okay.
when he made his new flute with what we call the bum system nowadays, so that is the first version in 1832 and the second version in 1847, he stopped to play as a virtuoso because he was entirely dedicated to
making instruments.
manufacturing. And he actually tried to have other virtuosos to get interested and promote his new flute. So his first system in 1832 was actually redesigned for different reasons. You know that Böhm was engineer at the same time as he was a flute player, and well, he first of all he had the idea to redesign the instruments because there were some things in the old system that he found unsatisfying and illogical in his mind, with his logical mind of an engineer. And also he wanted to increase the size of the tone holes. After he heard Nicholson in England, Charles Nicholson, who had a lot of sound, and because he had really big fingers, had designed a flute with wider holes.
Okay.
But Böhm himself, who had small fingers and thin fingers, had to invent something else in order to be able to to create such big holes on his flute.
Okay.
And then he designed, actually, that was a starting point of his reflection, and he decided to redesign entirely the flute with a new mechanism which would change the fingering. And that's what we call the 1832 Böhm system.
Okay.
So first of all, he also made a radical change, which was the G clef was opposite.
Yes. Yeah.
Instead of being a closed G, and you play everything without the small finger, and you press on it to get the G sharp.
Yeah.
Then, well, I didn't take such a flute, but I have some. The G sharp clef is open. So you play everything pressing on the small with a small finger, and you open it for the G sharp.
Yeah, which makes sense because everywhere else, when you put a finger down, the tone goes down. So it makes sense to do that.
For him, it totally makes sense, exactly. But the fact is, that was the reason of the major resistance for flute players to adopt his new flute, because on the simple system flute, that's the fingering for G, and actually G sharp is when you open the key.
Yeah. Okay.
Not if you. Yes.
Yes.
And here you play G sharp. And this is in reference to the old system flute that some French makers decide to take the Böhm system and to add a mechanism which would make the fingering come back more similar to the simple system flute.
Yeah.
And this is an instrument made by Claire Godefroy in Paris in the 1840s, one of the earliest with Böhm system, which shows this added G-sharp clef, which is called a Dorus clef.
Okay.
Dorus key. As then later, Böhm continued to rethink and redesign, and one of his the things he did not understand is that why the flute is blown on the thicker part.
Okay.
Unlike the other woodwinds, the conical woodwinds, So his first idea was to try to turn it around.
Okay.
But he did not succeed, and he decided to come back to a compromise, which is to have a cylindrical bore in the body with, nevertheless, a conical head joint.
Okay. Conical, so going that way towards the rest of the flute, or conical going to the head of the flute?
Going towards the end of the flute.
Okay.
And actually, this is what we have on the modern flute.
Yeah.
And here is another Claire Godefroy instrument, which is cylindrical and made with a more modern looking model. The one that he officialized in 1847. So what is important to know is that the first people who accepted to adopt the French flute were the French people.
Okay.
The French flutists. Many of them were very interested by the new flute, except the most important virtuoso of the time, who was Jean-Louis Toulouse, who always resisted and who continued until late to design that's a late Toulouse flute here.
Yeah. Because
But
Toulouse was,
still,
like, he lived until, what, like, when did
he
Toulouse die? He's quite recent. Like, it's more recent than I thought.
he was teacher in the conservatory until
Yeah.
1859.
Yeah, so it's quite late, yeah.
Yes, so it means all his students until 1859
Played Toulouse flutes, yeah.
had to learn the old system flute
Yeah.
because he would not allow bump system
Yeah.
players. But all the people of his generations or younger were, were adopting the bump system flute made of wood,
Mm-hmm.
and also decided to adopt the first silver flutes, which were made at the same time by makers like Claire Godefroy and his
Yep.
apprentice Louis Lotte, who later opened his own workshop. So, and when Toulouse retired, he was replaced by a Dorus, by a bump system player, and therefore, France is very centralized around Paris.
Yeah.
It is now, but it was already in this time, and this was actually giving the pitch to the rest of the country, and that's why French players adopted much quicker the bump flute. But despite this, at the same in the same time, while French flutists were already playing the silver bump flute, which looked virtually like the modern one, in other parts of Europe, until very late in the 19th century and way into the 20th century, then players still played the old system.
Yeah. Okay.
And this flute is made by Ziegler in Vienna, is identical to what the Doppler brothers were playing.
Okay.
So I have a project of recording Doppler pieces where we'll use this beautiful flute.
What is the head joint made out of?
It's ivory.
Okay.
So it was very much used in the 19th century to have a ivory head.
Okay.
So nowadays, of course, we don't make flutes with ivory.
Yeah.
We just try to rescue those which were made in ivory in this time.
Yeah.
Of course, it's a testimony and it has its own playing properties. Many of them are cracked, unfortunately.
Okay.
But this one came intact to me. And it's a heavy flute with a lot of extra keys, and which goes down to to B flat.
Whoa. Okay. So the B flat, is that the B and B flat are all played with the same finger?
Yes, you have for the little finger here, you have 4 keys, which is the small G sharp here.
Yeah.
Long F here, but then you have the B.
Wow.
And next to it, the B flat.
That's crazy. That's so cool. There's so much going on for the little finger, yeah.
Yes, so you have this kind of overview of the development of the flute, and you can see that way after Böhm invented his Böhm system, which was quickly adopted by the French, but there was a lot more resistance in other countries, especially in Germany, actually, except in Munich, where he made his own school. But in other countries, then players thought that the old system was a much more noble instrument, which allowed a lot more colors.
Okay.
And there was a strong resistance, it's between the 2 world wars that basically the switch was definitely made forever. But before, some people resisted, like Maximilian Schwedler in Leipzig, for example, who was quite influential. And Schwedler was the one who for whom was written Reinecke Concerto. So in 1908, he had his own type of flute to redesign, but still based on the old system. And the Reinecke Concerto was not written
I didn't know that either.
First to be played on a bum flute.
Wow. Okay. So when you're going through, first of all, thank you so much for that. That was incredible. I love that. That's really cool.
It was a bit long and technical, but
it's here. Yeah. Again, I don't care what the listeners think. This is for me. I'm enjoying this. They can enjoy it too. Quick question then on the Louis Lotte flutes. Do you own a Louis Lotte? Do you have one?
I don't have one because a very good friend of mine, Bernard Duplex, is one, if not the best expert in Louis Lotte. He has a beautiful collection of extremely interesting instruments, not only because they are good flutes, but also because they are flutes who belonged to some great flute players. like
Yeah.
Joseph Rampal, and then a little bit his son Jean-Pierre, like flutes that belong to Hennebins or to Dorus himself.
Okay.
And Bernard is an amazing person with whom I have a close collaboration, and he lent me many of his instruments for recordings and concerts. So,
Ah.
considering the price of a Louis Lot nowadays, decided that for now I'm happy, and he is happy that I use his flutes, and
Okay.
I did not
Okay.
really consider spending the fortune that I don't have into
Yeah.
buying a.
Have you ever played one of the Louis Lots that was played by Joseph Rampal or Jean-Pierre Rampal or one of the famous ones?
Yes, because I actually played mainly the Joseph Rampal flute,
Cool.
which I recorded in my CD Soir Païen. So you
Ah,
can
yeah.
hear the Roussel, les joueurs de flûte, for example, and all the melodies that I've mentioned with a voice, I played on
Yeah.
the Joseph Rampal flute, which is a
Ah,
very
cool.
good
Sorry,
one.
1 second.
But it's often they played in the early 19th,
1 second.
early
Sorry.
20th century.
Okay.
They often preferred the flutes which were made 50
In.
years before or
Okay.
40 years before, in the time of Louis Lot himself or his immediate successor, Villette.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
That was the favorite of many players. But
Ah.
because these flutes were often made in a lower pitch, for 435, that's
Oh
why
wow, that
many
is
of them
low.
were cut later to reach a higher pitch.
Oh, that is low. Here, can I ask you quickly then? Have you ever played or have you seen the gold Louis Lot flute that Jean-Pierre Rampal had?
No, I never played it. I
Ah,
saw it from close distance only because I took part in a convention in Paris, and
I would love to see
I
it.
think Shigenori Kudo
Yeah, he's
played
played
it.
it.
Yeah, but I remember that I don't know if it was the police or some private police, which came because the flute was brought from the bank where it's
Yeah.
hosted and given to him, and right when he got out of stage, he had to give back the flute
Wow. Okay.
to those people.
Oh, I would love to see that flute. I would love to. Oh, a gold Louis Lot is like, oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
it's amazing because it's an exceptional flute. Nowadays, half of the
Yeah,
professional flute
we all play
population
gold.
plays on a golden flute.
Yeah.
But in that time, it was completely exceptional. It was the
But
second gold flute made in the world. The
oh, there
first
was one
one was
before
yes, the first one was made by Rodol and Rose.
in London.
Um, in London, yes, and
Ah.
I think the reason that it's some Chinese society which they decided to offer this flute to I forgot the name of this player.
I think I know who you're talking about as well. It's I've read this recently when I was doing research on this. Was
Yes,
not it was a
I mean,
French player, no?
yeah, he was a French player, and
Yeah.
he has a kind of fan club in China, and they decided to put their
Oh,
money together to order a really special flute to Louis Lot, and the idea was also for Louis Lot to try to challenge Rodol and Rose, so he would make
okay.
a gold flute himself,
I
but he
didn't know
didn't
that
make
was the
any
first
other
one.
one.
Yeah, I know that. That's why it's so cool. Oh, thank you very much for that. Okay, quickly, because we got so much to get through, I'll shorten it down a little bit. But I do want to ask you about conducting, okay? And the one thing I want
Yes,
to start with is obviously you've got your Orchestre des Ambassadeurs La Grande Écurie, which
yes,
everyone should check out. I will put the link in the description, obviously. But before we get to that, there's quite a few flute players that have made this jump from being flute players to conductors. People like Patrick Gallois, Jaime Martin, even Terry Fisher. I think actually Alexandre Desplat as well was a flute player and composer conductor. Do you think there's something that helps conducting or is intuitive to conducting that comes from being a flute player?
I don't know.
Nothing special,
Honestly, I
no.
don't know. When I think the main thing, which, well, first of all, I wanted to be a conductor when I was 3 years old,
Okay,
because I
wow.
saw concerts on the TV,
A
and my parents
three?
probably even took me to a real symphony concert. And then, with the excitement of the 3 years old child, he
Yeah,
wanted to imitate and a
3 years
conductor, and I
old.
was fascinated by that the man would get this sound from 100 people. So I said I wanted to be a conductor, and then my parents told me that I needed to first to learn one, if not more, instruments. And among the small choices small choice of instruments which my parents could afford in the time because they didn't have much money, was the flute, and I picked up the flute. And from this moment, I completely forgot I wanted to be a conductor because I
Okay.
was so happy with my flute. I decided I want to be a flute player later. That would be my destiny. And eventually, when I was 20, this opportunity to conduct just came back by itself. So,
Okay.
but you must know that when I was very young, I also did some years of ballet. And
Really? Wow.
yes, yeah, and at some point I had to choose between flute and ballet
Cool.
because
Wow, you've done
it
everything.
yeah. And I think that also probably for me, very instinctively gave me the all from early age the sensation that sounds can be transformed into gestures.
Okay. And then that leads into conducting then
So I
naturally.
think it probably comes from there. And I would say that one also good thing of being a wind player is that well, about this essential thing, which is to breathe.
Yeah,
To
yeah.
breathe, not only for the wind players of the orchestra, not only for the singers that you might conduct if you conduct opera,
Yeah, but
but
also,
also just the breathing between the phrase and create a richer and more eloquent texture with the orchestra.
yeah, 100%. Like I've played with, even when I was in college, I played with certain student conductors, which when they were learning to be conductors, they would forget that when they give the beat, there's obviously a small moment in between where wind players breathe. And that has to be taken into consideration, which a lot of conductors didn't know when they were learning. I find it fascinating because also piano players breathe now as well. They'll breathe before they play. A lot of violin players will breathe. They'll adapt that. So maybe that's the secret of all these great flute playing conductors. You guys know how to breathe. How do you manage everything as well? Because so you're recording. I don't know how many albums do you know how many albums you recorded?
Well, I think it must be around 30
It must be.
as a conductor or flute player, soloist, chamber, and
Yeah,
concertos.
everything.
And chamber music. But I also made probably more than 100 recordings as an orchestra flutist.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's crazy. So you're recording all the time. You're playing the flute. You're conducting. You've got social media. You've got a YouTube channel to run. How are you balancing it all?
Well, first of all, I spend most of my time thinking about music and doing my projects because I live alone and I only take care about my job and my passion and my cat.
And your cat, I was about
Um,
to say, what's your cat called?
Nerin,
Nine.
that's
Okay.
the name of a character from Rameau opera.
Ah, okay.
Um, so I'm quite active, and I also have a lot of strong wills to do the things.
Yeah.
When I feel ready for them. And I have periods where I conduct more, but even when I'm conducting, I'll never go anywhere without one or two flutes to
Okay.
practice
Okay.
intensively. And I try to balance also my concert and recording activity in order that one doesn't take over the other one.
Yeah.
And my next recording will be called Les Années Noires. I'm supposed to record in the beginning of June
Mm-hmm.
with Prokofiev, Hindemith, Griffiths,
The poem.
Casella, and Jolivet, and Franck Martin.
Oh wow.
So you see, I also want to rebalance it towards a modern
So are
flute,
these
which
all
is
the flute and piano pieces and the Matin Ballade, the Griffiths poem?
yes.
Ah, okay. Who's the piano player? Can you tell me?
It's the one who played with me on the Undine album.
Hmm.
His name is Vasilis
Okay.
Varvarissos. He's a Greek, amazing, but just amazing pianist and musician.
And what kind of flute are you going to play on that album?
That's the only one where I'm going to use my 100% modern flute.
And what is your
My
100%?
It's Parmenon.
Oh, Palmenon. Yeah, I know them. They
Yeah.
made actually. They're based in Paris, aren't they?
Yes.
Uh,
Well, actually, they're based in Orléans, but officially this is
okay.
Paris.
Okay, yeah, because I think
Um,
they made. Did they make like a left-handed flute as well at one point? I saw they were
true.
experimenting with that. Yeah, they're really
Well, they
cool
do
guys.
experiment a lot. Yes,
Yeah.
they're even experimented with by creating a flute where all the holes are on the same side of the instrument.
Oh wow.
They're crazy and they're really genius, and everything is, even the tools are handmade. So
That's
they
great.
they
They're
they
really
never
cool.
learn to they never stop to learn, to experiment, and that's fantastic. That's why I really have a strong connection with them. But
They
I
are very cool.
actually I already recorded on this flute because if you go to my Les Concerts de Pan
Yeah.
YouTube channel, there are different recordings that I made, like the Berio Sequenza
The
or
sequences
the
on there, yeah.
Piazzolla tangos, for example. Then when it's my modern flute, I use that one.
Yeah, so I will say to the listeners, actually, you should go check that out. It's Alexis' YouTube channel, Le Concert de Pan. The link will be in the description, but it is great. I spent way too much time on it this morning before I started recording. I got way carried away. I went through every video, man. It was so much fun. So I will put a link in for that. Okay, just before we go, we've been talking for like over an hour, and I have loved this. This has been fascinating, but I'm going to give you some quick questions. Okay, quick fire questions, fun questions, just the end, and then I'll give you a little bit of chance at the end to plug anything that you want to plug to the
So
listeners.
when you make quick questions, it means that you want to have quick answers.
Not too quick. You don't have to panic. I can always cut it out as well. My editing team can make the time shorter. I've got a whole professional team that look after this. I don't. Okay, first question. This is the hardest one. This is never fair. But do you have a favorite flute concerto? At the moment, because I know it changes.
Nielsen?
Oh, first Nielsen I've had. Good answer. Okay, second question. Do you remember the first flute album that you bought? So CD, vinyl, tape, anything?
Maybe it's not the first, but I think the James Galway. It's a 4 CDs, which probably was a collection of other recordings on which there is Rodrigo, there is Mercadante, and many things.
I know the exact version you're talking about. Yeah, that's a good one. That's the first Galway one. Okay, do you remember the first album in general that you bought? So not necessarily flute. It could be any other type of music. Or was it a flute album as well? Was it the same one?
When you say that I bought, you mean as a ground up with my own money? Maybe it was Vivaldi Concerti da Camera with Il Giardino Armonico, but it's not the very first, but it's one that I remember.
Okay.
But from an earlier age, because my parents were listening to music, and then I had cassettes, the little tapes, and I remember listening over and over Beethoven symphonies or Bach suites, or Monteverdi madrigals at the age of 8 and 9.
Wow.
And people think you're crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I don't think you're crazy, but Monteverdi madrigals at 8 or 9. Wow. Even now I'm 31. I wouldn't. Okay. Good. Next one. If you could switch instruments and be as good on a new instrument, what instrument would you play?
The cornetto.
Which is like the trumpet, like the...
No, it is it's cornetto zink in German. It's an instrument from which was very widely used in the 16th and 17th century, which is it's a wood instrument, woodwind instrument, curved with a leather around and holes, but it has a small embouchure like
I've seen this,
yeah, and this instrument was the virtuoso and the most touching wind instrument in the Renaissance until the early 17th century, and many of the sonatas written in this time are for this instrument.
For cornet.
And it's one of the most fascinating instruments there is.
I'm sure you played it. You must have played one, no? Have you tried to play one?
No, I never tried because I was always afraid that this type of brass embouchure, which you have to play on the side and not center, could
destroy your lips.
My embouchure. And
true.
Also you need to have quite big fingers.
Well, maybe one day. Okay. If you could have any career outside of music, so if you had to do another job apart from music, what would you do?
There's not much that I can imagine, but I always thought that I would get involved into the protection of the orangutans.
Whoa!
And go to Borneo or
that's such
Indonesia.
A cool answer.
And,
orangutan protector. That's great.
One of the things which touches more is to look in the eyes at an orangutan, and then I start crying.
Really? I get scared, man. I went to the zoo recently and I looked into the eyes of an orangutan, and they're like, you can see how intelligent they are. They freak me out a little bit. They're like, it's nearly like looking into a person's eyes. They're so like emotive.
Oh yes, but they are very peaceful, and they are just. It's really like you have the. They're almost human. They're humans, but without all the bad things of the humans.
True. Yeah, okay, that is very true. Yeah, they're much better than humans, I will give you that. Okay, if you could have a drink with any musician, alive or dead, who would you have a drink with?
Alive or dead?
Alive or dead. So you can pick anyone. And language doesn't matter. So if you don't speak the same language, it's fine. We'll get a translator.
Well, I would say Ravel, but maybe it would be really stupid to miss that opportunity to meet Bach.
Yeah, I think Bach could be good fun to have a drink with. I think he'd be fun. You have a few beers, yeah. Bach could be good fun.
I don't know. Maybe he was not fun at all. We don't know.
Well, we'll find out. If we ever get the chance, we'll find out. Okay, and the very, very last question then. Do you have a favourite drink, alcoholic or non-alcoholic? You look like a wine man. You look like a man who knows his wine.
I don't know so well wine. I like wine, yes.
But you're French, so...
I don't know what to answer. Why don't I have a favorite drink?
It could be non-alcoholic as well. It can be like a soda, or one person answered double espresso. A lot of people really love coffee.
You know, I'm having my coffee now.
Yeah, you're French as well, so French people love coffee. Yes. I do miss that.
No, but red wine I do like.
Do you have a favorite type of red wine?
Rioja.
Oh, one of my favorites as well. Okay,
and I'm sorry, it's not even French.
It's not French, no. My favorite French wine is Beaujolais, but I love Rioja as well. Okay, amazing. Okay, we're done now, but you can have a few minutes. Is there anything you want to tell the listeners about? Anything you want to plug? Anything at all you want to tell people to check out? Now's your time. The floor is yours.
My time? Well, I don't know. It could be general advices about, well, who am I to give advice? But maybe to young players that playing the flute is a wonderful thing, and it's a wonderful instrument. But it's just your voice, and before all, be a musician who happens to play the flute. So it means be curious, look around, feed yourself with understanding every other instrument. You will always feed your knowledge about music by also being interested in other arts, because there are connections between all the other arts, as I spoke previously. And
beautiful.
And maybe just one thing which I would do from a little bit more promotional aspect.
Please do.
Just because we mentioned it quickly, Les Concerts de Pan is my YouTube channel. And first, to explain in 3 words what it is, I decided to record what I would like to be a big quantity of solo flute repertoire, always using the right instrument. And why did I do it in a video? It's because, well, I know that doing several CDs of solo flute would, interest only a few people, because when you get out of the Telemann Fantasias and Syrinx, then there's not much that can interest a wider public. And sometimes also by seeing a different instrument, by hearing it different, because you see it, and even a piece which is like just an etude or little virtuoso piece gets suddenly a special taste and a special interest. So this project I started some years ago, and I recorded until now 50 different pieces using nearly 50 different flutes. And at the end, because I wanted to be also educational, at the end there's always a part where I introduce the instrument, explain when it was made, the aesthetic, the ideas behind it. So this is a project, and I really invite everyone to come. And actually, it's important maybe to subscribe to it and to talk about it to other people, because at the moment, I hope it will grow and encourage me to continue this project, which I really want, but it's a heavy and very, very heavy financial investment. And I think at this point of my life, I really need to feel that
you get some rewards,
enough people, and that it's worth continuing.
Yeah, well, what I will do then is I'll put the link in to subscribe, which everyone should do. Subscribe, turn on the notifications for his channel as well. On that note, Les Concerts de Pan is the YouTube channel. It is incredible. I really advise people to go and listen to it. I genuinely spent way too much time this morning on it. I just went in to check a little bit to get a bit more info in my head. I was there for like an hour. Okay, so I recommend everyone go and dive down to it. It is so good. It's an educational resource as well as just being brilliant and a lot of fun. Alexis, thank you very, very much for this. This has been incredible. For me personally, it's been great to have someone of your stature on. I'm a big fan as well. So for me personally, I didn't even have to talk much. I just sat back and listened, and I really enjoyed it. So thank you very much. And thank you to all the listeners for tuning in. I'm going to hang up now, and then we'll chat off air. Okay?
Thank you
Bye,
for inviting
everybody.
me. It was a great pleasure.
You're very welcome, mate.